She fled Texas with $40, 2 toddlers, and a bruise she told herself was nothing. He owned every hotel on the Los Angeles skyline and hadn't spoken a full sentence to another human being in 3 years. She was hiding from a man who swore on their daughters' lives that she'd never escape him. He was waiting for a death quiet enough to finally feel like peace. They call Samuel Hayes the ghost, because the men who defy him don't get buried. They simply stop existing. But the ghost had never met Naya and Ariana. When a desperate mother smuggled her twin girls into the most dangerous private estate in Bel Air just to keep a job that paid her rent, she expected to be fired. She expected to be thrown out into the California heat with nothing. Though she did not expect to round the corner of the East Wing and find the coldest man in the city sitting cross-legged on a marble floor, his tailored suit jacket gone, his beard painted pink, and 2 giggling 1-year-olds treating his face like a canvas. She did not expect him to look up at her with an expression she hadn't seen on a powerful man's face since before her marriage destroyed her. Softness. What happens when the only man ruthless enough to erase her past is the same man her daughters have already chosen as their home? What happens when a ghost remembers he's still alive? The Greyhound smelled like stale coffee and other people's regrets. Katie had counted the miles the way she used to count bruises, quietly, privately, with a kind of arithmetic that didn't leave room for feeling. On 1,800 miles from Austin to Los Angeles. 3 days, 2 layovers, 1 diaper bag held together by a strip of packing tape she'd found on the floor of the San Antonio terminal. Naya had slept for most of New Mexico, her small fist curled beneath her chin like a comma. Ariana had not slept at all, choosing instead to practice a sound somewhere between a song and a complaint, which Katie absorbed into her chest the way she had learned to absorb everything, without flinching, without drawing attention. She had $43 left when the bus exhaled into the Los Angeles depot. $43, 2 toddlers, a rolling suitcase with a broken wheel, and a name written on the back of a gas station receipt, Hayes Estate, Bel Air. Ask for Mrs. Delgado, and tell her Rosie sent you. Rosie had been the woman in the seat ahead of her somewhere outside of Phoenix, a woman with a nurse's shoes and a grandmother's eyes who had listened to Katie's careful half-truths for 4 hours before sliding the receipt backward without a word. She needs reliable help, Rosie had said. Don't tell her your situation, just tell her you're experienced. Katie had never cleaned a mansion in her life. She had cleaned her own home methodically and compulsively, because a clean home had fewer things to argue about. But she could learn. She had always been extraordinary at learning things out of necessity. The taxi she couldn't afford took them up into the hills where the air thinned and the houses disappeared behind walls that cost more than most people's lifetimes. When the Hayes estate emerged through the iron gate, Katie felt the breath leave her body in a slow, involuntary exhale. The estate wasn't a house. It was a statement. Pale limestone stretched across 3 deliberate stories, flanked by Italian cypress trees, standing at attention like sentries. A circular driveway of hand-laid Belgian cobblestone curved before a front entrance framed in brushed bronze. Even the hedgerows seemed to have been trimmed with the kind of precision that cost significant money and expected to be noticed. She paid the driver $40 and did not think about what that left her. Mrs. Delgado was a compact woman in her 60s who wore her silver hair swept back and her skepticism openly. She looked at Katie. She looked at the double stroller. And she looked at Katie again with the specific expression of someone being asked to solve a problem they did not create. Rosie said you were experienced. Mrs. Delgado said. I am, Katie said, and held the woman's gaze with everything she had. She didn't mention the children. My childcare fell through this morning, Katie said. The lie arrived smoothly, worn soft from the number of times she'd rehearsed it on the bus. It won't be a recurring issue. I just need one shift to prove I'm worth the position. After that, I'll have arrangements in place." She wouldn't. She had no arrangements. She had $3, 2 daughters, and a motel voucher from a church outreach program that expired in 4 days. Mrs. Delgado studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. In the driveway, Ariana chose that precise instant to produce a single, luminous smile, the kind that arrived on her face without warning and tended to destabilize adults who weren't prepared for it. Mrs. Delgado's expression shifted by precisely 2 degrees, which, Katie had learned, was as much as practical women allowed themselves. "Trial shift," Mrs. Delgado said finally. "East wing, bathrooms and the parlor corridor. The girls stay in the staff quarters in the lower level with the door shut. Mr. Hayes does not encounter the children under any circumstances. He values silence above everything else in this house." She paused. "Above everything." "Understood," Katie said. She meant it. She understood the architecture of a man who required silence, the specific kind of damage it took to make a person build their life around the absence of noise. She had lived inside that damage for 4 years. She recognized its floor plan. She followed Mrs. Delgado through a side entrance, past a kitchen with a marble island the length of a school hallway, past a gallery corridor hung with original canvases she didn't have the education to name, but had the instinct to recognize as extraordinary, past a sweeping staircase of dark walnut and aged brass. The house smelled of cedar and something floral she couldn't identify, expensive and deliberately calm, the scent of money that had decided it no longer needed to announce itself. She settled the girls in the lower room, kissed each of their foreheads, and handed Naya the worn rabbit she refused to sleep without. "Be invisible," she whispered. She had no way of knowing that invisible was the one thing her daughters had never learned to be. Samuel Hayes had not always been a man who ate alone. There was a version of him, somewhere beneath the accumulated weight of the last 3 years, who had sat at a full table and known what it felt like to pass a bread basket without calculating the silence between one heartbeat and the next. That version felt geological now, layered under so much pressure it had become something else entirely, something harder, something that no longer resembled its origin. He took his breakfast at 7:15 each morning at the far end of a dining table that seated 22 and had not seated more than 1 since the autumn that changed everything. The table was French, 18th century, hand-carved walnut, sourced from an estate sale outside of Lyon by a decorator he'd subsequently dismissed because she'd had the misfortune of referring to it as charming. Nothing in Samuel's life was charming. Everything in it was precise. His coffee arrived in a Bernardaud porcelain cup, black, no sugar, at a temperature he had specified in writing during his 2nd week in the house, and which had never once needed to be corrected since. A single copy of the Financial Times lay folded to the left of his plate. His breakfast, poached eggs, Alaskan smoked salmon on toasted brioche, a small dish of Osetra caviar that he ate not for pleasure, but because his physician had prescribed it with the exhausted authority of a man who had given up arguing, sat arranged with geometric intent. He read. He ate. He did not look up. The hotel empire that bore his name operated across 11 countries and 43 properties, each one a monument to a standard of luxury so relentless it had become its own philosophy. Hayes Collection hotels did not have rooms. They had residences. They did not have concierge desks. They had personal directors, a distinction that cost the company considerably and justified itself in the kind of client who noticed. Billionaires noticed. Heads of state noticed. The particular breed of ultra-wealthy individual who had already owned everything and was now purchasing experience. They noticed most of all. This was the front. It was legitimate, profitable, and impeccably managed. It was also the most effective infrastructure for moving money, information, and influence across 3 continents that anyone in the Western underworld had constructed in the last 2 decades. Samuel had not inherited the shadowed side of his operation. He had built it, methodically and without sentiment, in the years following his father's death, when he discovered that the Hayes family name carried debts of an entirely different currency than cash. Alliances, obligations, arrangements made in rooms with no windows by men who considered handshakes more binding than contracts. He had honored every one of them, then he had renegotiated every one of them. And then quietly, and with the kind of patience that unsettled people who were accustomed to urgency, he had made himself indispensable enough that the renegotiating had only needed to happen once. They called him the Ghost, and he preferred it to the alternatives. By 9 o'clock he was in his private study on the 2nd floor, a room of dark bookshelves, a Steinway Model D that no one played, and a desk of solid black granite that a former associate had once described as a landing strip for bad news. The description had amused him briefly, which was as close to laughter as Samuel Hayes came these days. On the desk, 3 encrypted phones, a leather portfolio bearing the Hayes collection crest in muted gold, and a Mont Blanc pen he used exclusively for signing documents that would never appear in any public filing. His lieutenant, a quiet man named Dorian, who communicated almost entirely in nods and brief written summaries, appeared at 10 with the morning's operational report. 2 hotel acquisitions moving through due diligence in Seoul and Lisbon, a customs arrangement in Rotterdam that required delicate retiming, a senator's re-election fundraiser that Samuel would attend, contribute to generously, and use to confirm 3 separate conversations that would never be referenced in the contribution. He read everything. He signed what required signing. He delegated nothing that mattered. He did not take personal calls. He did not schedule lunches. He did not allow music in the common areas of the house, because music had a way of arriving in a key that his body remembered before his mind could redirect it, and remembering was the one indulgence he absolutely could not afford. The Steinway sat in the corner of the study beneath a light that caught the lacquer finish and turned it luminous and useless and devastating all at once. He had considered removing it 17 times, and he had not removed it, because removing it would have required making a decision about what it meant, and Samuel Hayes had built an entire empire on the discipline of never making decisions while in the presence of grief. He simply worked around it, the way he worked around everything, the way he had taught himself to work around the exact shape of the absence that lived, permanent and load-bearing at the center of every room he entered. Outside, somewhere in the lower level of his immaculate and silent house, 2 small girls were about to wake up from their nap. The master bathroom was the kind of room that made Katie understand, in a very concrete way, the distance between her life and other lives. Carrara marble, floor to ceiling, and veined in grey and gold and laid in a herringbone pattern so precise it looked generated rather than installed. A freestanding soaking tub in brushed white stone positioned beneath a skylight that poured natural light across the surface of the water like something staged for a magazine that most people would never hold. Double vanities in matte obsidian, each fitted with Dornbracht fixtures that she had to look up on her phone during a 30-second break, just to confirm she was not imagining the price point. She was not imagining it. A single tap cost more than her last month's rent in Austin. She worked carefully and thoroughly, the way she did everything that mattered. The grout lines, the underside of the vanity ledgers, the place where the soaking tub met the floor, which was the place most people missed and which, in Katie's experience, was always where the truth of how a thing was maintained revealed itself. She moved with a quiet efficiency, born not from training, but from years of making herself small and useful in spaces that did not belong to her. She had checked on the girls 20 minutes ago. Naya had been asleep, the worn rabbit tucked under one arm. Ariana had been sitting with the focused, meditative expression she wore when examining something small, in this case, the Velcro strap of her own shoe, with the intensity of a scholar encountering a primary source. The playpen was secured. The door was shut. If you are still listening to this story, kindly hit that subscribe button and share this video with your friends. She told herself she had 20 more minutes before she needed to check again. She was wrong by approximately 19 minutes. She heard nothing. That was the thing she would return to afterward, in the breathless gap between realizing they were gone and finding them. The absence of sound. No crying, no small feet on hard floors. The particular quality of silence that only exists when toddlers are somewhere they absolutely should not be and have committed to the project completely. The playpen, she discovered when she arrived at the lower room with her heart already abandoning its normal rhythm, was empty. The door, which she had pulled shut but apparently not fully latched against the soft spring tension of its hinge, stood open by precisely the width of two determined 14-month-olds moving in single file. The corridor stretched in two directions. Katie chose the wrong one first, which cost her 45 seconds, she felt, in her spine. She retraced. She moved toward the staircase, following the logic of toddlers, which was not logic at all, but a kind of magnetic attraction to whatever was most elevated, most forbidden, most carpeted in a manner that felt interesting underfoot. The study door was open. She registered this from the end of the hallway and experienced something she had no word for, a sensation that was fear and inevitability combined, arriving in the body the way cold water does, all at once and everywhere. She covered the distance without sound, an instinct so deeply practiced it required no thought, and stopped in the doorway. Samuel Hayes was at his desk. He was not on the phone. He was not mid-signature on any of the documents spread across the black granite surface. He was sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has been interrupted in the middle of a thought and has not yet decided how to respond to the interruption. On the floor beside his desk, on a Khotan silk rug that had no business being anywhere near small children, sat Naya and Ariana. Naya had discovered the leather portfolio and was turning it over in her hands with an expression of solemn authority, as though reviewing documents of her own. Ariana had found something else entirely. She had found the Mont Blanc pen, uncapped, and was applying it to the only canvas immediately available to her, which was the back of her own left hand, with the methodical satisfaction of an artist who has finally found the right medium. Neither of them appeared remotely concerned. Samuel's eyes moved from the children to Katie in the doorway. His face held an expression she could not immediately name. Not anger, which she had braced for with every muscle in her body. Not the cold, contractile fury of a man whose space had been violated. Something else. Something unguarded and involuntary that appeared to embarrass him slightly once he became aware of it, the way a person looks when caught in the middle of a feeling they thought they were having privately. The silence stretched between all four of them, taut and strange. Ariana looked up from her hand, registered her mother's presence in the doorway, and held the uncapped Mont Blanc aloft with an expression of absolute triumph. Katie's voice, when she finally located it, came out barely above a whisper. "I am so sorry." Samuel Hayes looked at the child holding his pen like a trophy. Something moved across his face, like weather crossing a landscape that had not seen weather in a very long time. He did not tell her to get out. 3 days passed before Katie allowed herself to believe she still had the job. Mrs. Delgado had said nothing following the incident in the study. Samuel Hayes had said nothing either, which was in some ways more unnerving, because silence from a man of his particular architecture did not mean the absence of consequence. It meant the consequence was being decided somewhere private and unhurried, and would arrive on its own schedule. Katie worked each shift with the focused discipline of someone who understood she was on borrowed time, and she cleaned things that did not need cleaning, simply because movement kept the anxiety from settling into something she couldn't carry. She had, cautiously and with significant engineering, improved the childcare situation. Mrs. Delgado had permitted, with the economy of a woman granting a concession she would not acknowledge granting, the use of a portable playpen in the staff anteroom off the east corridor. A room with a door that locked from the outside, a door that Katie tested 3 times before she was willing to trust it. On the 4th morning, she tested it a 4th time. Then she went upstairs. She worked the 2nd-floor corridor methodically, moving through the guest suites with their fretter linen and hand-stitched headboards and side tables, bearing Christoffely accessories that she handled with both hands and held her breath near. She polished the hallway console, a Louis XVI piece in gilt bronze that she had identified from a small brass plaque on its drawer face, and was moving toward the linen closet for fresh supplies when she registered, from the far end of the corridor, that the study door was open again. She had locked the anteroom. She was certain. She was learning, in a house where certainty had a shorter lifespan than she was accustomed to. The sound reached her before she reached the doorway. Not crying, not the particular register of distress she had trained herself to detect across distances and through walls, and even, she sometimes believed, and through sleep. This was the opposite of distress. This was the sound her daughters made when something had exceeded their expectations so completely that language had not yet caught up with the experience. A high, breathless, continuous delight that arrived in waves. She reached the doorway. She had prepared herself, in the 3 steps it took to cover the remaining distance, for a version of the scene inside that she could respond to practically. She had not prepared herself for what was actually there. Samuel Hayes was on the floor, not seated at his desk, not standing with the controlled, vertical authority she had catalogued as his natural state. On the floor, on the Khotan silk rug, with his jacket discarded across the arm of his chair and his white shirt collar open at the throat. Naya was on his shoulders, both small fists buried in his dark hair with the proprietary confidence of someone who had decided this was hers, wearing an expression of pure, wind-swept joy. Ariana was in his arms, or more accurately was using his arms as a brace, while she applied what Katie recognized, with a lurch of pure horror, as her own travel lipstick to his face. Hot pink. The drugstore kind she'd grabbed at the San Antonio terminal because it was $2 and had a mirror in the cap. It was across his beard, his jaw, one cheekbone, a sweeping, enthusiastic arc across his chin that Ariana was currently reviewing with the critical eye of someone considering revision. He was letting her. That was the part that stopped Katie completely in the doorway, her hand against the frame, at her chest doing something she didn't immediately have a category for. Not the mess. She could address the mess. Not the lipstick on what she could only assume was a shirt that cost more than her bus ticket. It was the fact that he was letting her. His large hands were positioned loosely at Ariana's back, steady and careful, the hands of a man maintaining an infrastructure of safety so quietly that the child in his arms had no idea it was there. His jaw was not set. His shoulders were not arranged in the particular geometry of controlled tolerance she had seen on men who were enduring something for the sake of appearances. He was looking at Ariana the way people look at things that have reached inside them without permission. And then Naya, from her position on his shoulders, grabbed a fistful of his hair and leaned sideways to examine her mother in the doorway with the serene authority of a child who has never once doubted her welcome anywhere. Samuel's eyes followed. They met Katie's across the room, and for one unguarded moment, before the architecture reassembled itself, before the walls came back up, she saw it clearly. Not danger, not irritation. Something that looked impossibly like gratitude. He had Mrs. Delgado deliver the offer, which told Katie something. A man comfortable with every variety of difficult conversation. A man who, by all available evidence, had built an empire on the precise management of situations most people would not survive, had chosen to communicate through an intermediary. She filed that detail away in the part of her mind that had become, and over 4 years of necessary vigilance, very good at reading what people revealed by the things they declined to do directly. Mrs. Delgado presented it over the staff table with the same expression she brought to every transaction, measured, unsentimental, and faintly protective of a neutrality she had clearly decided was the only survivable position in this household. Live-in position. Full-time. A private suite on the lower east wing, separate from the staff quarters, with its own entrance from the garden corridor. A monthly salary that Katie heard once, and then needed a moment before she could hear anything else. The girls would have the adjoining room, which would be, Mrs. Delgado said, without elaborating, appropriately furnished. The role extended beyond cleaning. Household coordination, schedule management, the kind of quiet operational presence that kept a residence of this scale functioning without requiring its owner's attention. "He is a private man," Mrs. Delgado said, which seemed to be the entire briefing. "I understand." Katie said she did not understand. Not yet. She spent that evening in the motel room with the girls asleep across the single bed and her phone open to a search she had started 3 times and closed twice. On the 3rd attempt, she let it run. Samuel Hayes. The legitimate results arrived first: Forbes profiles, architectural features on the Bel Air estate, a trade publication piece on the Hayes collection's expansion into Southeast Asia. The photography showed a man who wore Brioni suits with the ease of someone who had never known anything else. A man photographed at charity galas and hotel ribbon cuttings, always slightly apart from the group, always with the composed, unreachable expression of someone who had agreed to be present and nothing further. Then the other results. Buried, but not buried deeply enough for someone who had survived by learning to look. Nothing explicit, nothing that would hold in a courtroom. But the shape of a thing could be understood without a confession. The right names appearing in proximity to his, the right industries intersecting at angles that didn't reconcile with legitimate hotel revenue alone, a federal inquiry from 4 years ago that had been quietly discontinued in a manner that the journalist covering it had found notable enough to mention in a paragraph that read carefully and said very little. Katie sat with this for a long time. She thought about the $43 she'd arrived with, and she thought about the church motel voucher, expired now by 2 days, and the manager who had extended it once out of something she'd chosen to receive as kindness and could not afford to request again. She thought about Brad, somewhere behind her on the map, and the way he had said, "I will find you," with the calm specificity of a man stating a fact rather than making a threat. Then she thought about the study, the silk rug, the large, careful hands at Ariana's back. She thought about the way Samuel Hayes had looked at her daughters, not with the performative warmth of adults who find children briefly charming and then locate the nearest exit, but with something slower and more serious, something that recognized them as people who deserved to be held carefully. She had watched men interact with Naya and Ariana for 14 months, and she had become fluent in the difference between tolerance and respect. He had looked at them with respect. She closed the search results. The next morning she told Mrs. Delgado yes. She met with Samuel directly for the first and only time regarding the arrangement. A 10-minute conversation in the study that he conducted from behind the granite desk, with the efficient formality of a man closing an acquisition. He did not reference the lipstick. He did not reference the Mont Blanc pen, which had been replaced, she noted, by 2 identical replacements in the desk tray. He outlined the terms with precision, slid a document across the desk that had been prepared by someone who billed considerably by the hour, and indicated the line where she should sign. She signed it. He looked at her then. Directly. Without the careful management of eye contact she had noticed in their previous encounters, and said the only unrehearsed thing she believed he had said in the entirety of their acquaintance. "No one in this house will be made to feel afraid." It was not a reassurance. It was not the offering of a gentleman trying to soften a sharp situation. It was a perimeter, stated once, without decoration, the way he appeared to state everything that actually mattered. Katie recognized it for what it was because she had spent 4 years living inside the exact opposite of it. She picked up her daughters that evening and brought them home. 6 weeks into her new life, Katie made the mistake of feeling safe. It arrived gradually, the way warmth does after a long cold, not announced, not dramatic, but present one morning in the simple fact that she had slept through the night without mapping the exits. The suite Mrs. Delgado had described as appropriately furnished had materialized into something that still occasionally stopped Katie in the doorway when she returned to it in the evenings. A restoration hardware sleigh bed in weathered oak, bedding in a thread count that she had no reference point for, except that it felt like being held. For the girls, a room in pale cream and sage with 2 small beds shaped like houses, and a Pottery Barn bookshelf stocked with picture books that had appeared overnight between her acceptance and her arrival, sourced by no one Katie had asked, and which she suspected, without evidence she could confirm, had been selected by the house's owner. She did not ask, and she had learned that Samuel Hayes performed kindness the way he performed everything, without audience, without acknowledgement, and with the specific implication that mentioning it would inconvenience you both. The girls had adapted with the mercurial completeness of very young children, for whom a safe room with soft bedding required no further justification. Naya had claimed the left house bed and installed her worn rabbit in the right one as a tenant. Ariana had immediately located a Lalique crystal bird on the hallway console outside their door and needed to be redirected from it with increasing creativity on a daily basis. Katie had started to breathe in full sentences again, and she was arranging a delivery of Acqua di Parma toiletries in the guest suite on a Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang with an Austin area code she no longer had saved, but had never been able to forget. She let it ring. It rang again 4 minutes later. Then a third time, from a different number. A Dallas prefix this time, which meant he had prepared for her not answering the first one. She sat down on the edge of the guest suite's chaise longue, a thing upholstered in pale champagne velvet that she was almost certainly leaving a crease in, and stared at the screen until it stopped. The text arrived 20 minutes later. No greeting, no preamble. "I know the city. I know the neighborhood. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and he agrees the situation you've placed my children in is grounds for an emergency custody review. Come home on your own or come home through the courts. Either way you're coming home." Katie read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the velvet chaise and sat very still, the way she had taught herself to sit in the years when stillness was the only available response to something too large to outrun. He had used her social security number. She understood this without needing it explained. The job application, filed legitimately through the Hayes Estate's HR process, had generated a paper trail that anyone motivated enough could follow. She had known, somewhere beneath the 6 weeks of cautious peace, that this was always a possibility. She had simply allowed hope to negotiate the timeline downward. He arrived in person 2 days later. She did not see him come. She heard about it from Mrs. Delgado, who appeared in the kitchen doorway at 3 in the afternoon with an expression that had abandoned its customary neutrality in favor of something considerably more alert. A man at the front gate, Texas plates on a rented Lincoln Navigator, requesting to see Catherine Mercer by name. Claiming to be the father of the children residing on the property and citing, Mrs. Delgado relayed, with precise distaste, a recent conversation with a family attorney regarding custodial rights. He had not come quietly. He had come with paperwork. The document which Dorian brought to Katie without explanation shortly after was a preliminary filing, a custody petition on the grounds of parental unfitness. The language was clinical and thorough and had clearly been drafted by someone expensive. It cited the move across state lines as evidence of instability. It cited the employment situation, a domestic position in a private residence with no fixed educational plan for the children, as evidence of neglect. It cited, with a specificity that made her vision briefly narrow, the nature of the household's primary resident and his known associations as evidence of endangerment. He had done his research. She would give him that. She was still holding the document when she became aware that she was no longer alone in the kitchen. She looked up. Samuel stood in the doorway in a charcoal Keaton suit, his eyes moving from her face to the papers in her hands with the quiet, diagnostic attention of a man reading a situation rather than a scene. He said nothing. He simply waited, and with the patience of someone who had already decided the outcome and was allowing her the space to arrive at the conversation on her own terms. Katie set the papers on the marble island between them. "He found us," she said. Samuel's eyes dropped to the filing. He read it with the economy of someone accustomed to documents designed to intimidate, his expression shifting not toward alarm, but toward something colder and more deliberate. The specific stillness of a man deciding, methodically and without drama, what happened next. When he looked up, the gratitude she had seen on the silk rug was gone. What was there instead was considerably older, considerably less forgiving. "He won't get them," Samuel said. He said it the way he had said everything that actually mattered, once without decoration, and as though the alternative was too minor to require acknowledgement. Dorian placed the legal assessment on the granite desk at 7 the following morning and said nothing, which was how Samuel understood it was not good news. He read it in full. Then he read the relevant sections again, with the particular attention he reserved for documents that required him to understand not just what they said, but what they made possible. The family attorney his team had retained, a woman named Petra Voss, whose reputation in California custody law was without equal, and whose hourly rate reflected this without apology, had been thorough. Her conclusions were precise and unambiguous, and sat at the bottom of the third page like a diagnosis delivered without softening. The interstate relocation, conducted without the co-parents' documented consent, created genuine legal exposure, regardless of the circumstances that had motivated it. Emergency protective orders were available, but required documented evidence of physical threat that met a specific and demanding threshold. A custody review, once formally petitioned, moved on the court's timeline, and not Katie's. Petra Voss estimated that timeline at 4 to 6 months of proceedings, during which Brad Mercer would retain full legal standing as a co-parent and the right to petition for interim access. 4 to 6 months, during which a man who had arrived in Los Angeles with a Lincoln Navigator and a pre-prepared filing would have both motive and legal architecture to make Katie's life structurally impossible. Samuel set the assessment down. He looked at the Steinway in the corner, which he did when he was thinking through something he hadn't yet decided. Then he looked at the window, where the California light was coming in across the cypress trees with the indifference of a morning that had no stake in any of this. He called Dorian back in at 8:30. He had Katie brought to the study at 9. She arrived in the composure of a woman who had spent the night not sleeping and had decided that composure was the only acceptable response to that fact. She was wearing a pale grey sweater he recognized as part of the clothing stipend Mrs. Delgado had arranged on his instruction, and she was holding her own hands in front of her. Not wringing them, just holding them. The way a person holds themselves together when they have decided that falling apart is a luxury the current situation cannot accommodate. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. He told her what Petra Voss had said. All of it without abridgment, because she was not a woman who could be usefully protected from accurate information. She listened without interrupting, her eyes on his, her expression doing the careful and invisible work of absorbing something difficult without showing the full weight of what it cost her. When he finished, the room held its silence for a moment. "What are my options?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Legally, on your current standing, limited ones. Brad Mercer has money and preparation and a lawyer who understands how to use 4 to 6 months as a weapon." He paused. On my standing, the options are different." She looked at him steadily. "What does that mean?" Samuel reached into the portfolio beside his desk and removed a single document. He placed it on the granite surface between them without sliding it toward her, leaving it in the neutral territory of the desk, making it an offering rather than a pressure. "A marriage contract," he said. "Legal, formal, structured with full terms agreed by both parties and documented by Petra Voss, who will also represent you exclusively throughout the process. My name attaches to yours and the girls immediately upon filing. The custody petition becomes a challenge against the Hayes household rather than a challenge against an undocumented domestic worker who crossed state lines without consent." He let that sit for a moment. "Brad Mercer's lawyer is expensive. Mine is better. And the people Brad Mercer would need to cooperate with him in this city know my name in a context that makes cooperation with him a significantly unattractive proposition." Katie's eyes moved to the document and then back to him. "You're talking about a legal arrangement?" "Yes. In name. In whatever terms you decide," he said. "The document has blank sections. Petra Voss's instruction is to fill them according to your comfort and your requirements, not mine." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, somewhere below the study window, he could hear the faint and specific music of Naya and Ariana in the garden with Mrs. Delgado. A sound he had begun without having made any conscious decision about it, to orient his mornings around the way other men oriented theirs around coffee or the Financial Times. "Why?" Katie said finally. The single word carried everything she hadn't asked yet. Samuel considered the Steinway. He considered the garden below the window. He considered the pink lipstick that had required 3 applications of Clé de Peau cleansing oil to fully remove, and which he had removed without any particular urgency. "Because no one in this house will be made to feel afraid," he said. "I said that to you once. I meant the address. I should have been clearer that I meant everywhere." Katie looked at the document on the granite desk. Her hands had stopped holding each other. She reached forward and drew it toward her. The Hayes Collection Charity Gala was held annually at the flagship hotel on Wilshire Boulevard, the building of glass and pale limestone that Samuel had acquired 7 years ago and rebuilt from the lobby upward according to a standard that had subsequently made it the most photographed interior in Los Angeles. The ballroom alone, with its hand-blown Murano chandelier suspended 40 feet above a floor of hand-laid Calcutta marble, had appeared in 3 separate architectural publications and 1 major motion picture, the latter without Samuel's permission and at considerable subsequent legal expense to the studio involved. Katie had not planned to attend. The contract had been filed for 11 days. Petra Voss had described Brad Mercer's legal team's response as recalibrating, which she had delivered with the satisfied economy of a woman accustomed to watching opposing counsel encounter an obstacle they had not anticipated. The immediate threat had quieted to the specific quality of silence that precedes a decision rather than a retreat, and Katie had been navigating it with the vigilance of someone who knew the difference. Samuel had suggested the gala as a practical matter. Petra Voss had agreed. A public appearance, documented, photographed, the new Mrs. Hayes present at the event her husband's name underwrote, was, the attorney explained, a data point in a narrative they were constructing for a family court judge who would, in 4 months, be deciding what kind of household the twins were being raised in. Katie had understood. She had worn a dress from a Roland Mouret collection that had arrived in her suite via a garment bag bearing a Rodeo Drive address she had not been given a receipt for, and had not asked. The girls were not supposed to be there. Mrs. Delgado had been with them at the estate. This was the arrangement. This was what Katie had confirmed twice before the car arrived. What she had not confirmed, and what she discovered via a call from a breathless Mrs. Delgado at 9:47 in the evening, was that a man identifying himself as the children's father had arrived at the estate gate with a copy of a co-parental access order, preliminary, contested, not yet ruled upon but not yet dismissed, and that the security staff, pending clarification from Dorian, who had been unreachable for 11 minutes, had made a decision they would not be employed long enough to regret. He had the girls in a car outside the hotel when Samuel's phone rang. Katie saw his face change, and she had not seen it change like that before. Not the cold deliberation she had catalogued in the study, not the unguarded softness of the silk rug, but something that existed beneath both of those things. Something that had been formed in a much earlier and less forgiving period of his life, and which did not require any decision to activate. It simply arrived, fully constructed, and rearranged his entire physical presence in the time it took him to lower the phone from his ear. He said 2 words to Dorian, who materialized from the periphery of the ballroom with the seamless efficiency of a man who had been waiting for precisely this kind of word. Then he looked at Katie. "Stay here," he said, not as a command, but as the most direct form of protection available to him in that moment. She did not stay. She was 4 steps behind him through the side corridor, down the service elevator, and out through the hotel's delivery entrance onto the side street, where a black Escalade sat running with its hazard lights off, and Brad Mercer standing beside it in the amber glow of a street lamp, his hand on the door handle, looking like a man who had rehearsed this, and was irritated that the audience had not yet assembled. The girls were visible through the window. Naya was crying. Ariana had gone very still, which was worse. What followed lasted approximately 6 minutes. Samuel did not raise his voice. He did not make a single gesture that could have been characterized by any witness as physical. He walked to within a conversational distance of Brad Mercer and spoke to him in a register so low that Katie, standing 8 feet away, I caught only the cadence and not the content. Brad's expression moved through several phases, confrontational, then uncertain, then something she had never seen on his face in 4 years of marriage. Fear. Genuine and immediate, of the kind that does not respond to bravado or legal documents. Dorian, meanwhile, had opened the car door and retrieved the girls with the calm, practiced gentleness of a man who had been directed to be gentle and had taken the direction seriously. He brought them to Katie without a word. Ariana pressed her face into Katie's neck. Naya had stopped crying and was watching Samuel with the wide, serious eyes of a child taking inventory of something important. Brad said something, a single sentence, his voice attempting a register of authority it could no longer sustain. Samuel responded. Whatever he said arrived with the particular weight of information rather than threat, specific, evidenced, and delivered, with the tone of a man reading terms that had already been agreed to by parties Brad Mercer had not yet been introduced to but would find, upon any attempt at verification, to be entirely real. Brad Mercer got back into the car. He did not look at Katie. He did not look at the girls. He looked briefly, and with an expression she did not have the vocabulary for, at the middle distance, the look of a man revising something fundamental about his available options. The car left. Samuel turned back toward the hotel entrance. He paused when he reached Katie, his eyes going immediately to the girls, to Ariana's face still pressed against her mother's neck, to Naya's small hand gripping the Roland Mouret fabric at Katie's shoulder. Something moved through him that he did not attempt to conceal. "What did you say to him?" Katie asked quietly. Samuel looked at Naya, who was still watching him with her careful, taking inventory expression. He reached out and straightened the small bow in her hair with 2 fingers, a gesture so unhurried and specific that it appeared to surprise him slightly. "I told him the truth," he said, "about what his life looks like from here, and what it looks like from every other direction available to him." He paused. He's a practical man. He understood. Brad Mercer was on a flight to Dallas by midnight. Petra Voss received a formal withdrawal of the custody petition at 9 the following morning, drafted in language that suggested its author had been advised, incomprehensively and without ambiguity, that continuation was not in his interest. She called it unusually thorough for a withdrawal. Katie did not ask Samuel to elaborate. She had learned, in the months since the gas station receipt and the broken-wheeled suitcase and the $43, that some forms of safety did not require full illumination to be real. She simply received it, the way she was slowly, carefully learning to receive everything he offered, with both hands and without flinching. The construction began on a Tuesday, without announcement. Katie heard it before she understood it, a low, deliberate percussion from the north wing that she had catalogued, in the first disoriented moments of waking, as something structural and significant. By the time she had dressed and moved through the garden corridor with her coffee, she found 3 workers in the hallway outside the dark panelled library she had cleaned weekly for 4 months, but never seen anyone use. The wall between the library and the unused corner suite beside it was being opened with the kind of methodical, unhurried intention that suggested the decision had been made some time ago, and the execution was simply catching up. Dorian was standing nearby with a clipboard, and the expression he wore when he had been given instructions he found interesting, but had elected not to editorialize. "What is this?" Katie said. "Renovation," Dorian said, which was accurate and entirely uninformative. She found Samuel at his desk. He was on the phone, one of the encrypted ones, and held up 2 fingers without looking up, which she had learned meant he was aware of her and would be finished shortly. She sat in the chair across from the granite desk and waited, which she had also learned was a thing she could do now, without the constant low-frequency monitoring of exits that had once accompanied any moment of stillness in a room with a powerful man. He finished the call. He looked at her. "The north wing," she said. "Yes. You're taking down the library wall. The library has 400 books in it that I haven't opened in 3 years." He said, "It has no practical function. The combined space will have better southern exposure." She waited, because she had also learned that Samuel Hayes communicated in layers and that the practical explanation was never the only one. "It will be designed for the girls," he said. "A proper room, not the furnished suite, something built for them specifically. There is a designer I've worked with on 3 Hayes Collection properties. She understands light." He paused with the brief consideration of a man choosing words that were doing more work than they appeared to. Children should have light. Katie looked at him across the granite desk, and the Mont Blanc pens, and the encrypted phones, and the leather portfolio with the gold crest, and felt something shift in her chest with the slow, tectonic certainty of a thing that has been moving for a long time, finally arriving at its destination. "The contract," she said carefully. "This isn't in the contract." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He stood then and moved from behind the desk, something he rarely did during a conversation, she had noticed, and as though the granite surface served a function beyond the organizational. He crossed to the window that looked down onto the garden, where Naya and Ariana were visible below with Mrs. Delgado, conducting what appeared to be a very serious inspection of the rose bushes along the south wall. Naya was crouching with her face close to a bloom of pale Juliet roses, her expression one of complete and solemn scientific attention. Ariana had located a small decorative stone from the garden border and was carrying it with the reverence of someone transporting something of significant value. Samuel watched them for a long moment. "I had a son," he said. It arrived quietly, without preamble, the way he said everything that cost him something. He was 2 years and 4 months old. He liked the garden. He did not elaborate on the rest of it, and she did not need him to. She had read the shape of the absence often enough by now to understand its dimensions. I told myself that the life I was building here, the silence, the control, the careful management of everything within these walls, was sufficient. That it was the appropriate response to having lost the thing that made noise and chaos and disorder feel like abundance rather than intrusion. He turned from the window. Naya and Ariana made that position very difficult to maintain. He said, there was something in his voice that was not quite humor and not quite grief, but existed in the precise geography between them. "I want to build them something real. I want to build you something real. Not a contract, not a legal perimeter." He paused. "A life, if you're willing to let me." Below in the garden, Ariana had presented her decorative stone to Mrs. Delgado with the expectant authority of someone offering a gift of considerable significance. Mrs. Delgado accepted it with appropriate ceremony. Katie looked at the man standing before her, the empire and the silence, and the 3 years of grief worn into the set of his shoulders, and understood that what he was offering was not rescue. She had rescued herself, with $43 and a broken-wheeled suitcase, and the particular courage of a woman who had decided that survival was not the ceiling. What he was offering was something she had not allowed herself to name until now. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. Their daughters moved through the garden below in the California light, entirely unaware of being observed, and entirely at home in a space that had been built, stone by stone and silence by silence, into something that could hold them. "Yes," Katie said. She said it the way he said the things that mattered, once without decoration, as though the alternative was too small to require acknowledgement. Below them, Naya looked up from the roses. She found her mother's face in the window with the unerring instinct of a child who always knew exactly where her people were, and produced a smile of such complete and uncomplicated joy that it traveled through the glass and rearranged everything it touched. Samuel made a sound beside her, low, brief, involuntary, that she recognized with absolute certainty as the first honest laugh she had ever heard from him. It sounded like a wall coming down,